Welcome to Crosstalk Solutions. My name's Chris, and today we're going to be taking a look at the new light switches, the new UniFi Lite switches from Ubiquiti Inc. I have one of them right here. This is the 16-port model, but they also have a new UniFi Lite 8-port PoE switch. So the 8-port switch is model number USW-Lite-8-PoE. with an MSRP of $109. The USW Lite 8 PoE switch features 8 total gigabit ports, of which 4 of them can be used for PoE, and they are rated at 802.3 AT PoE+. That's 30 watts per port for those 4 PoE ports. The whole thing can be managed by UniFi. Comes with a 60 watt power supply. The 8-port switch itself uses a maximum of 8 watts, and then each of the ports have a maximum of 30 watts, but you can't max out 30 watts out of every single one of those ports because it only has a 60 watt power supply total. That being said, both of these, the 16-port and the 8-port, are wall mountable, and they actually have a pretty nice wall mount. So it's just this little plastic doohickey here that screws into the wall, and then the switch itself basically just pops on either up this way or this way. So up either way, this can fit in. The one thing I will say is once you have this wall mount little piece in the back of the switch, it's actually pretty hard to take out. So I think you could even probably mount it sideways without issue. Like, I wouldn't anticipate that this would fall off the wall if it was mounted sideways. I don't think you're limited to just ports up or ports down. So speaking of the 16-port switch, this is the USW Lite 16 PoE. The MSRP on this switch is $199. The USW Lite 16 PoE features 16 RJ45 gigabit ports, of which 8 of these ports can be used for 802.3 AT PoE plus power. You can tell which ones are PoE because they have a little lightning bolt with a plus symbol next to them. It's basically these first 8 ports. If you're looking at the switch, it's the left-hand side of the switch, ports 1 through 8. Also managed by UniFi also includes a 60 watt power supply, which is interesting because both the 8-port version and the 16-port version only have a 60 watt power supply total. So it's kind of a, it's called a light switch, and it is in fact a light switch. This is kind of a light duty PoE switch. You wouldn't want to be cramming this thing full of PoE devices that are going to suck up a lot of power because it only has 60 watts total to share among the switch itself and then the 8 PoE ports, which is usually okay because a camera or a phone, those things are usually going to take between 4 to 5 watts each. So shouldn't be a big deal. Even if you had like 8 phones plugged into this thing, you're probably not going to max out the total PoE power. So let's go ahead and get this thing adopted in UniFi and take a quick look at it. It's very simple to adopt. And then we're going to talk about this switch, or these 2 light switches, in comparison with some of the other Ubiquiti switches that are available, because there's so many 8 and 16 port UniFi switches now. It's a little tough to determine like which one is the right one for you. So let's get this thing adopted to UniFi, and then that's what we're going to talk about next. In most cases, when you plug the switch into power and then plug the switch into your network, it's going to be detected automatically by your UniFi controller. However, this switch does also still have SSH capability. So for instance, if I log into the IP address of the switch with SSH, I can log in as UBNT and UBNT, and then we are now into the switch via SSH, which means that I can manually set and form this switch up to a UniFi controller that it is not detecting automatically. However, in this case, it did detect my UniFi controller automatically, as we can see right here, and we are set to pending adoption. So I'm going to just click adopt and then let this switch adopt, and then once it has fully adopted, we will take a look at it in the UniFi controller. Okay, so the UniFi Switch Lite 16 PoE has been successfully adopted. It took less than 60 seconds to adopt and provision. And as we can see here, it actually says downgrade, which means that the firmware that this switch comes with is a little bit newer than the firmware of my existing UniFi controller. And my UniFi controller is 5.13.32. Okay, so they have now a 6.x version of UniFi. They've had some issues with that version, so I have held off doing any further updates to UniFi until we hear about those issues being resolved. But what we can see here is, I'm not going to downgrade it, by the way. I'm just going to leave it as is. If we click on the UniFi Switch Lite 16 PoE, we essentially have all of the standard Switch stuff that we have come to know and love with UniFi. We can see that it is uplinked to my USW24 PoE on port number 15. We can see our traffic statistics. If we click on clients, we can see that there's really no clients connected to this thing. It says Big NAS, but that's actually my Synology NAS, which is not connected to that switch. One more little note here. Something is a little bit goofy. Now, it said that the USW Lite 16 PoE had one client, and that was my Synology NAS. And if you look here, that does not show up on the topology, but it literally just disappeared as I turned the camera on again to film this little segment right here. It was showing my Synology NAS off of the USW Lite 16 PoE in the topology map, but my NAS is actually link aggregated to my 24-port switch. So I'm not sure, UniFi just got a little bit confused there for a minute, but it seems to have corrected itself. Now if we go back to the device and click on the USW Lite 16 PoE and click on clients, we can now see there's 0 clients. So for whatever reason, it thought that my Synology NAS was connected to it, but it wasn't, and now it has corrected itself. And then as soon as I shut off the camera again, it is actually popped back on as a client of the USW Lite 16 PoE switch. So you can see USW, let me get myself out of the way, USW Lite 16 PoE, one client Big NAS. If I come over here to the map, you can see that my NAS, this Synology NAS over here, plugged into the link aggregated to the 24-port switch, is showing up under the USW Lite 16 PoE for some reason. So not exactly sure why it's doing that, but it does seem to sort of come and go. So maybe over time it'll adjust itself and permanently stay off of that switch. If we click on ports, we have all of the same port capability that we typically do. We can set our switch profiles. We can set it to a specific VLAN or a custom VLAN profile that we've created. You can also set up link aggregation. You can set up port mirroring. Notice, however, there is no 24-volt passive PoE option. You either have off or PoE plus, which in most cases I would just recommend leaving PoE plus on. Under config, we can set the name. I always set the name to the model number, so we're going to say USW Lite 16 PoE, and we're going to say save. And that's it. There's really nothing to this switch. It's a very standard PoE switch. It's a very standard UniFi PoE switch and functions in UniFi just like all of their other switches. All right, so let's talk about these light switches and sort of where they fit into the overall UniFi infrastructure. We're going to start with the 8-port light switch. That's the one that I don't have here. But essentially, it's almost exactly this switch, okay? This is the US 8 60-watt switch. I love this switch. We've deployed a ton of them, but it's the same thing. It's got 60 watts of power total. It has 4 non-PoE ports and 4 802.3 AT ports. So you can think of the light switch as the USW Lite 8 PoE switch as basically the newer version of this one, right? So it's kind of the newer, sexier version. It also, if you look at the wall mounting, this one's much more difficult to wall mount because you got to sort of get your screws in there and then make sure you have the right size screws and make sure they're perfectly even. You know, it's more of a pain in the butt. Whereas this one is really nice. You just take this little guy, stick it on the wall, make 2 pencil marks, put your screws in, or just screw it right in, and you're good to go. You just hang the switch on the wall. It's very, very easy. So I like the upgrade to the wall mounting mechanism. But other than that, I mean, this is the same exact price as the USW Lite 8 PoE. So if you are in the market for a switch like this, then either one is fine. I'd probably go for the newer light switch because it just looks a little bit nicer. It's a little bit sexier, if you will. It's this, you know, sort of nice white case and good-looking UniFi, equipment. Whereas this is a little bit more industrial-looking, as sort of like the Gen 1 version. Now, if you're looking for a PoE switch that's a little bit heavier duty, you always still have the US 8 150 watt, which is a switch that I've deployed in a number of places. I actually like this switch a lot, mostly because not only are all 8 ports PoE, you have 150 watts of power across all of these ports. You also get 2 SFP ports, and you can also do 24 volt passive on each of these ports, as opposed to the US 860 watt and the USW Lite 8 PoE, which both of those are only 802.3 AT PoE plus power. There's no 24 volt passive capability. So this switch, though, is significantly more expensive, right? So both of these are $109. This 8-port switch is $199, okay? So which is the same price as the Lite 16-port switch, right? So $199 for that guy. Now, where does the USW Lite 16 PoE, or how does it stack up to the other PoE switches? Well, there isn't really a one-for-one equivalent of this 16-port Lite switch. So I actually kind of like this one. It's a desktop form factor, meaning that it's not rack mountable. Some people don't want a rack mountable switch when they don't have a rack. So in that case, this is a decent option for you for $199. If you do need a 16-port rack mountable switch, UniFi makes the USW 16 PoE, which is one of their Gen 2 switches. It has a 1U form factor. It has that little nice 1.3-inch touchscreen display. It has the same power, basically. So it's it's 8 ports of PoE and 8 ports of non-PoE. It also has 2 SFP ports, which this one does not have any SFP ports, but it's $100 more. So it's $299 for the USW 16 PoE. Price and feature-wise, let's take a look at how these switches, the Lite UniFi switches, stack up against some of the competing switches out there that are available on Amazon and other places. So the first one that I'm going to look at here is the TP-Link 8-port gigabit PoE switch, right? So this has PoE across all 8 ports. It's only $79, but there's a downside to it in that it's not managed, right? So this is a dumb switch. It does have PoE, but basically whatever VLANs you're putting into it, there's no ability to do like per port different VLANs. I don't even know if it has VLAN tagging or not. It might be able to pass VLANs, but it certainly is not managed in the sense that you can actually log into a GUI on this TP-Link switch and configure it. So this is sort of the bottom of the line. If you just needed a PoE switch, you had a very flat vanilla network, this one will work for you, and it's PoE across all 8 ports. But taking a step above into the sort of layer 2 managed switches, here we have the Cisco SG250 08HP. It's $135.49. So we just jumped from an unmanaged $79 switch that's, $40 cheaper than the 8-port Lite UniFi switch to one that is now $25 more expensive than the Cisco switch. But it is layer 2 managed. These Cisco switches can be managed through, Cisco has their own sort of central management thing. I'm sure it also has its own onboard GUI. And this switch has PoE across all 8 ports as well. So one more that we'll take a look at, the Netgear. The Netgear is $137.99, so almost $30 more expensive than this UniFi switch. It also looks, I don't know, personally I don't like the look of this switch. But it's a managed switch. It also has an SFP. So, if you want to do SFP uplink, you can spend about, almost $30 more and you can get this Netgear switch instead. Again, not centrally manageable. So if you are bought into the UniFi infrastructure, I would just recommend getting the UniFi switch, right? So you can always try to save money here or there or get, more bang for your buck, etc. But there are trade-offs to all of these things. This Netgear switch, for example, not centrally you can't administer it centrally. It looks like crap compared to the UniFi switch, but it does have PoE across all 8 ports instead of 4 ports, and it has an SFP capability. So again, it all comes down to me, whether or not you're already bought into the UniFi infrastructure, whether or not you need to administer this switch remotely. So for instance, this Netgear switch, no way to administer it remotely, right? You'd have to be on site or you have to open ports through a firewall to get to it or something. No one's going to do that. So yeah, I think the pricing for this UniFi 8-port switch is right in line with what you would expect to pay. Let me know if you think differently on that. Put your thoughts down below. I'd love to hear them. The 16-port switch, again, I also think is reasonably priced. And I know that the complaints are going to be, why doesn't it have PoE across all of the ports? But you would pay more for that, right? So I think it's reasonably priced for the amount of PoE and the features and the aesthetics that the switches have. If you disagree, let me know. Put that down in the comments below. I'd love to hear about it. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you give me a thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more videos like this, please click subscribe. My name's Chris with Crosstalk Solutions, and thank you so much for watching.